Hi, this is Reinhard from Everyday Systems. You are what you repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. This is a snappy paraphrase of Aristotle by Will Durant, who I have discovered seems to be the source of most of the memorable Aristotle quotations on the internet. Which is not to diminish it or to knock Will Durant. I think it's remarkably good paraphrasing and very true to Aristotle. But more importantly, I think there's a huge amount of actual truth in it. It's true to reality. And everyday systems are built around this concept of the power of habit, the power of little repeated actions to change your nature versus heroic one-offs that may have a lot of flash and bang but don't permanently or sustainably solve a problem. And if you look carefully, even things that seem like excellent singular acts often turn out to be, at least in large part, manifestations of long-standing habits. Case in point, you may have read about this or seen it on TV. About a decade ago, I remember there was a story about a man who had an epileptic seizure in a New York City subway station and fell onto the tracks just as a train was approaching. A bystander, a father waiting with his two young daughters, jumped down after him and covered the guy's body with his own just as the train rolled over them. And he pushed them both into that kind of ditch between the rails where there's just enough clearance, apparently, for the train not to tear you to pieces if you lay flat to the ground. And it worked. The bystander, air quotes around bystander because he did anything but stand by, saved the epileptic man's life at great risk to his own in front of his daughters in a split-second decision. He didn't know the guy. They're even different races. His daughters would presumably have been rather traumatized if this rescue attempt didn't pan out and he got killed in a very messy way right in front of their eyes. There was no time to think. He had every excuse to just stand there along with everyone else and let this happen. No one would have blamed him, but none of that stopped him. He did this incredible thing. When reporters asked him about it afterwards, and this really struck me, he said, there hadn't been time to think, to make a conscious decision. He credited the training he'd had in the military and construction work with giving him the habits that made what he did come mostly automatically. Is this excessive modesty? Is this guy heroic and modest at the same time? I don't think so, or at least not completely, because you hear something similar in these heat-of-the-moment life-or-death situations frequently. That there just isn't time to make a rational decision, to weigh the pros and cons. Habit, character, the reptilian brain, whatever you want to call it, takes over. So the reason why I'm telling this is that even when on the surface it seems like this textbook case of the power of one-time heroics, habit is playing a big role, maybe even the leading role if you look deep. But is habit always the answer? And this is what I'm going to focus on today. Are there situations in which one-time decisive actions can make a lasting change? I think there are, and today I'm going to talk about one of them. And in contrast to the story I just told you, it's about as unheroic as you can get. It's a book review. I'm going to talk about Tidiness, and more particularly about this best-selling book on the subject entitled The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, The Japanese Art of Decluttering and Organizing by Marie Kondo. Or Mary, I actually don't know how to pronounce her name. Chances are you're at least familiar with it. I think it's #1 on at least one of the New York Times bestseller lists. So I'm not going to attempt an exhaustive summary, but I'm just going to focus on what I found interesting from an everyday system perspective, and in some, in this one important way, on this contrast with what has been the everyday system perspective, on its emphasis on decisive one-time actions rather than habits to attack the problem of being overwhelmed by your physical possessions. Because this book isn't about building a tidiness habit, it's about putting your house in order. This wonderful biblical phrase. Once you do that, the author contends, this order you've created will be largely self-sustaining. Why? Because, one, you won't have to tidy as much because there's a lot less stuff, and she talks a lot about how to do this cull, and it's very interesting and different than what you may be familiar with. Two, tidying will be easier because everything will have an obvious place, so there's less head scratching about where stuff should go. Three, you will be inspired to tidy more because any deviations from the order you've set will be visually offensive to you. So once your house is in order, really properly in order, it stays in order, more or less naturally. That is the contention, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a step back and look at the rather funny-sounding title of this book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. Now, the word tidying is a little quaint and antiquated sounding, I think, to American ears. It sounds like a sort of small-minded, fussy, almost optional activity that we do only for negative reasons. It's unpleasant and relatively unimportant compared to our grand visions of ourselves. And, wouldn't it be nice if we could pay somebody to do it for us? But here we're told it's life-changing, not unimportant, and not, presumably, unpleasant. On the surface, this seems absurd, but that's also what drew me to this book, this sort of provocative absurdity. And yet it's very gently put, it's not hitting you over the head, and the whole book reads this way with a very polite authority, calmly and confidently telling you how to change your life through this seemingly insignificant activity. It felt very different from any American self-improvement book I've ever read, and that's, I guess, pretty much the only kind of it. I wasn't even aware that other cultures had self-improvement books, and I liked that. That tone was enough to sustain my interest. I really felt like I was getting insight from a very different place. I wasn't finishing her sentences for her. They were genuinely surprising. So, to simplify drastically, what is the Kondo system? In 6 bullet points. Marie Kondo recommends that you view tidiness, as I said, not as this personal habit that you practice regularly, but as a single or small number of decisive actions putting your house in order. So again, very different from the habit-based mindset of everyday systems, and yet in this sphere, and probably others, I think she's onto something. 2, instead of attacking disorder room by room, tackle disorder by kind of stuff. So instead of going through your closet, everything that's in there, and go through all your clothes, wherever in your home they may be located. Gather them all into a pile where you can see them. This is a little like how the no-S diet forces you to visually confront the potential excess of your meal on a single plate. The idea is that you won't have a proper sense of how much you have of a class of item and what's worth keeping unless you see it all in front of you. And as with dietary excess, you will probably be shocked. 3, the compassionate cull. Physically handle each item. If it's no longer useful to you, as she goes further beyond utility, if it no longer sparks joy or makes you happy, no matter how useful or inspiring it might have been in the past, take leave of it. Don't just toss it in the trash, but say goodbye. Literally thank it for the good service it has done you. There's something almost animistic about this process. The objects are like persons or spirits, and that might strike some as ridiculous or even offensive, but it is also undeniably satisfying and effective, because whether we admit it or not, we anthropomorphize or animize, and we have these animistic psychological relationships to objects that make us feel bad if we callously throw them out, and so normally we don't, and we hoard. By indulging our inner animism by sending these objects off with dignity and appreciation, it becomes much easier and less heart-rending to part with them. And so we can get rid of a lot more stuff. I have to admit, though I find this idea very charming, I haven't done a whole lot of thanking and leave-taking just yet in my tidying efforts since my limited conversion to the condo method. Maybe I'm just a hard-hearted bastard about stuff, or maybe that's a higher spiritual stage that will come as I continue my condo practice. 4. Start with the easier categories of stuff, with the fewest emotional attachments. Photos, for example, are going to be much harder to part with than clothes, so do clothes first. That way you can practice the method and build up your skill at it and make satisfying, rapid initial progress without endlessly fussing over every little sentimental item. 5. Once you've done this ruthless, this kind but ruthless animistic purge, you will have vastly less stuff to organize. You've solved most of the problem. And what struck me is that when you get down to this level of possessions, they almost organize themselves. I keep having these eureka moments post-purge where I look at my remaining stuff in whatever category, I look at a key place to put them, and bam, like Michelangelo looking at a slab of marble and suddenly seeing a vision of the statue he will turn it into, it becomes irresistibly clear. 6. That being said, she does have some very useful advice on post-purge organization. My favorite principle that she articulates is that ideally everything should be easily visible. So instead of putting clothes in vertical piles, where every item conceals the item beneath it, try to put them horizontally in rows so you can see them all when you open the drawer. Again, this is something that resonates with everyday systems. By arranging things this way, you can eyeball the state of your possessions and quickly spot what you're looking for, or what you're missing, or whether something doesn't really need to be there. You know, a pair of pants you never wear becomes an eyesore that you can't ignore, and so you're nudged to get rid of it by this visual pressure. When everything in your pantry is visible at a glance, you don't need to rely on some Internet of Things, technological innovation that everyone's talking about now, to tell you that you're running low on cannellini beans. The gaping void in the pantry is visually shouting it out to you. There's a lot more, but I've covered what I need to for everyday systems purposes, and if you're at all interested, read the book. It's good, it's short, it's different, and even if you don't wind up implementing any of it, it's thought-provoking. Is it life-changing? I don't know. The author cites several examples of people who, once they've put their physical houses in order, go on to sort out big relationship or career issues. Probably that's not going to happen for most readers, but I have been genuinely surprised at how differently I've been looking at my possessions since reading it, and it does make me happy every time I open my closet to see the order there, or the fridge, when all the tall bottles are on this shelf and all the short bottles on the other. It's really a thing of beauty, and I'm thinking, what other areas of my life besides physical possessions could benefit from decisive, one-time ordering actions versus the habits I've been focusing on with everyday systems? Now, I haven't by any means managed to condoize our entire home, and the main reason for that, I think, is the biggest limitation of the book. It doesn't sufficiently account for the existence of other people in your house, most notably those other little people who seem to relish disorder and are capable of producing fantastic levels of it almost instantaneously. I'm pretty sure the author does not have kids. But she does give a piece of advice which I think is a helpful start, at least for those of us who do not live alone. Start with your own stuff. The stuff that doesn't involve buy-in or cooperation or reluctant consent from anyone else in your family. Once you've done that, then consider public areas or other people's areas. So far, I've made it through my clothes, my closet, my tools, my basement workshop area, and the kitchen, the least contentious public area in our house because I have a certain culinary authority there. Culinary, how do you say that? Next up, I think, is books. I trained as a librarian. I'm not sure if that's going to make it easier or much harder. And that, my friends, is the Everyday Systems take on the Marie Kondo method. It's interesting, it's useful, and the emphasis on one-time decisive orderings is a good corrective or balance to traditional everyday systems. The yin to their yang, the screwdriver to their hammer, and I'm looking forward to assimilating it into core everyday systems to create a wider self-improvement tool set. I hope you got something useful out of this. Please let me know either way in the discussion link. And please keep the suggestions coming. I haven't nearly run through my current spurt of podcasting inspiration. There are a bunch more episodes in the works, but it can't hurt to have more or to know how to prioritize what's on deck already. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.